For months, military analysts focused on artillery duels, drone attacks, and trench warfare along Ukraine's southern front. Yet while attention remained fixed on the battlefield itself, Ukrainian planners appear to have been working towards something far more ambitious, a campaign designed not simply to destroy Russian equipment, but to attack the entire logistical architecture supporting Russia's southern war effort. Between June 9th and June 11th, a remarkable sequence of strikes unfolded across the northern approaches to Crimea. Within just 48 hours, 6 separate bridges connecting Crimea to Russia's controlled territories came under attack. At first glance, these may appear to be isolated strikes against transportation infrastructure. In reality, they represent something much larger. Together, these bridges form the arteries through which fuel, ammunition, reinforcement, spare parts, and military supplies flow between Crimea and Russian forces fighting in southern Ukraine. The operation began with renewed attacks against the Chonhar Bridge. This crossing has long been one of the most important logistical gateways linking Crimea with occupied territories to the north. When the bridge was struck and traffic disrupted, Russian military planners were forced to redirect movement onto alternative routes. That was exactly what Ukrainian strategists appear to have anticipated. As Russian convoys shifted toward the Henichesk-Arrabat Strait corridor, Ukrainian forces struck again. The Henichesk Bridge became the next target. Then came the final phase. On the night of June 10th and the early hours of June 11th, Ukrainian drones and precision strike systems reportedly targeted 4 additional bridges along the Armyansk-Perekop axis, the last major land corridor connecting Crimea to Russian positions beyond the peninsula. By the end of the operation, 6 separate bridges across had either been damaged, disabled, or rendered unsafe for normal military traffic. The significance of this cannot be measured merely in terms of destroyed concrete. Military logistics is often compared to the human circulatory system. Frontline troops can only fight along as arrive tanks. Tanks became useless without fuel. Artillery becomes silent without ammunition. Air defense systems become little more than expensive metal structures when missiles can no longer be delivered. From this perspective, the bridge campaign appears less like a collection of strikes and more like a coordinated attempt to suffocate the entire military network. Open source military observers estimate that tens of thousands of Russian personnel stationed across southern Ukraine depend heavily on routes passing through Crimea. At the same time, Crimea itself hosts a substantial concentration of Russian troops, equipment depots, airfield command centers, and logistic facilities. The challenge for Ukrainian planners was obvious. How do you place pressure on such large force without launching an expensive frontal assault? The answer may have been to attack the roads connecting everything together. What makes the operation particularly notable is its apparent sequencing. The strikes were not conducted randomly. Instead, each attack seems to have been designed to trigger a predictable Russian response. First, damage the primary route. Then force traffic onto the alternate route. Next, destroy the alternate routes. Finally, target the remaining escape corridors. If that interpretation is correct, Ukraine was not merely striking bridges. It was shaping Russia's movement and then attacking the route Russia had no choice but to use. This is why many military analysts describe logistic warfare as a battle of mathematics rather than firepower. Every convoy follows a route. Every route has bottlenecks. Every bottleneck becomes potential target. The side that understands these relations gains the ability to influence events far beyond the actual strike zone. And nowhere was this more evident than at Henichesk. For Russian commanders, the bridges connecting Henichesk to the Arrabat Strait was far more than a simple crossing. It served as an emergency lifeline. Running along a narrow strip of land between the Sea of Azov and the Sivesh lagoons, the Arrabat route provided an alternative path whenever the main crossings faced disruption. In contingency planning, such routes are invaluable because they offer flexibility when primary supply corridors are threatened. Russian logistic planners reportedly relied heavily on this corridor as a backup option. That dependency may have made it perfect target. According to reports from Ukrainian sources and open source intelligence assessments, extensive reconnaissance preceded the attack. Satellite surveillance, drone observation, and intelligence gathering allegedly monitored movement patterns, security routines, radar coverage, and defensive positions around the bridge for weeks. Particular attention appeared to have been paid to the local air defense network. Modern bridges attacks are rarely successful unless planners first understand where radar coverage is strongest and where weakness exists. The goal is not simply to launch drones. The goal is to find a path through the defensive shield. When the attack finally came, Ukrainian strike system reportedly focused on critical structural sections rather than merely attempting to cause surface damage. The result was significant disruption to traffic across one of the most important alternative routes available to Russian forces. Yet the physical destruction of the bridge may prove less important than the logistical consequences that followed. Once major supply routes disappear, military traffic does not vanish. It concentrates elsewhere. And concentrated traffic creates a new vulnerabilities. Fuel convoys, ammunition trunks, armored reinforcement, engineering equipment, and support vehicles suddenly find themselves competing for fewer available roads. These remaining roads become increasingly crowded, increasingly predictable, and increasingly vulnerable to further attack. For Russian forces operating around Zaporizhzhia and the southern front, this is precisely the scenario military planners work desperately to avoid. The destruction of a bridge can often be repaired. The loss of feasibility is far harder to restore. And as events around Chonhar and Henichesk would soon demonstrate, Ukraine's campaign was only beginning. The Chonhar strike hitting the heart of Russia's southern supply network. If Henichesk represented Russia's emergency backup route, Chonhar represented something even more important: It was the main highway. For years, the Chonhar crossing served as one of the most heavily used transportation corridors, linking Crimea with Russian-controlled territories in southern Ukraine. Every day, military vehicles, fuel tankers, ammunition trucks, engineering equipment, and personnel move across this route. Military experts often describe logistics as the hidden battlefield of every war. Most soldiers never appear on television screens while loading ammunition boxes. Fuel convoys rarely make headlines. Spare parts deliveries are not dramatic enough to dominate news cycles. Yet without them, armies stop functioning. This reality explains why the Chonhar Bridge carried such immense strategic value. Reports indicate that a substantial portion of military traffic moving between Crimea and the southern front depended on this corridor. Destroying or severely damaging it will not immediately defeat Russian forces, but it will force commanders to solve an extraordinary difficult logistical problems under combat conditions. And that is exactly what appears to have happened. The attack against Chonhar was not the first attempt. Earlier strike has already demonstrated Ukraine's interest in this crossing. However, the renewed attacks during June seem to have been designed to finish what previous operations had started. Rather than simply damaging the roadway, Ukrainian planners appear to have aimed for lasting disruption. Open-source images released after the attack showed visible damage to critical sections of the bridge. Traffic movement was reportedly disrupted, forcing Russian authorities to search for alternative solutions. For military commanders on the ground, every hour of disruption matters. A delayed ammunition shipment today may translate into reduced military fire tomorrow. A fuel convoy that arrives late can leave armored units immobilized during critical operations. The effects accumulate rapidly. What makes the Chonhar strike particularly significant is the timing. The attack occurred during a period when Russia was already facing increasing pressure from Ukrainian drone operations across occupied territories and Crimea itself. As a result of Russian commanders were confronted with difficult choice. They could either continue attempting to use a damaged route under constant threat of additional strikes or divert traffic elsewhere. Neither option was attractive, and that was precisely the strategic dilemma Ukraine appears to have been trying to create. Military campaigns often succeed not because they destroy everything, but because they force the enemy into making increasingly unfavorable decisions. The moment Russian logistics began shifting away from Chonhar, Ukraine's next move became possible. The pressure moved toward Henichesk, then toward the final remaining corridors, connecting Crimea to the mainland. Step by step, the network began shrinking. Why the Perekop corridor matters. To understand the next phase of the operation, it is necessary to understand geography. Crimea is often discussed as though it were an island. In reality, it is connected to the mainland through a handful of narrow land corridors. Among them, none is more than Henichesk-Perekop. For centuries, this narrow strip of island has served as gateway to Crimea. Empires fought over it. Armies fortified it. Military historians repeatedly describe it as the key to controlling the peninsula. At its narrowest point, the corridor offers a very little room for maneuver. Large military formations cannot easily spread out. Supply traffic becomes concentrated. Movement options become limited. In military terms, it is a textbook choke point. Russia understood this long before the current war. Following the large-scale invasion of Ukraine, extensive defensive works appeared across the area. Satellite imaging revealed anti-tank trenches, defensive fortifications, and dragon teeth obstacles, and layered defensive positions stretching across portions of the corridor. The message was clear. If Ukraine ever attempted a direct assault toward Crimea, Russian forces intended to make the crossing extremely costly. Yet there is a difference between defending a corridor and depending on it. After the strikes against Chonhar and Henichesk, dependence became the rare problem. As alternative routes disappeared, the Perekop-Armyansk corridor increasingly became the last remaining major land connection available for large-scale military logistics. That transformed it into an obvious target. The more critical route becomes, the more attractive it appears to enemy planners. According to reports from occupied Crimea and Russian-installed officials, Ukraine drones launched a coordinated overnight operation against multiple bridges crossing along this final corridor. The attacks reportedly lasted for several hours. Instead of focusing on a single target, Ukrainian forces appear to have attacked several key crossing points almost simultaneously. This approach carries an important advantage. Repairing one bridge is difficult. Repairing several damaged bridges at the same time is exponentially harder. Engineering resources become stretched. Construction teams become vulnerable. Traffic bottlenecks worsen. Confusion increases. The operation reportedly affects crossing near Armyansk as well as bridges spanning sections of the north of Crimea Canal. Together, these structures formed an interconnected network supporting movement into and out of Crimea. Once those crossings came under attack, the situation changed dramatically. What had been a flexible logistics system suddenly began to resemble a funnel, and funnels create vulnerability. Military convoys that previously enjoyed several route options now found themselves with fewer choices and greater exposure to Ukrainian surveillance and strike capabilities. For commanders responsible for maintaining supplies across hundreds of kilometers of front line, this represented a nightmare scenario. The issue was no longer simply whether supplies existed. The issue became whether they would be delivered. That distinction is crucial. An enemy possesses enormous stockpiles, but if transportation networks fail, those supplies become effectively useless. A shell sitting safely inside a warehouse cannot support a soldier fighting 50 kilometers away. Fuel stored in Crimea cannot power tanks on the front line unless someone can transport it there. And transportation depends on infrastructure. Infrastructure depends on bridges. This is how battle for southern Ukraine increasingly resembles a contest between logistic systems rather than a traditional clash of armies. Ukraine is attempting to make every kilometer of Russian supply movement more expensive, more dangerous, and more uncertain. Russia, meanwhile, is attempting to preserve enough transportation capacity to keep its forces supplied despite constant pressure. The destruction of 6 bridge crossings does not automatically decide the outcome of the war, but it does increase the strain of every vehicle, every convoy, every engineer, every commander tasked with sustaining Russian southern military presence. And as those pressures continues to grow, attention inevitably turns toward the final lifelines, still connecting Crimea to the outside world. Among them, one structure stands above all others, the Kerch Bridge. And if the northern approaches to Crimea are becoming increasingly restricted, the strategic importance of that bridge is about to become greater than ever before. Peace be upon you. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Bye.